Jean Anyon says in Radical Possibilities that the U.S. is a nation of regions. Over 80% of Americans live in one of the 366 metropolitan areas. Almost half of the population lives in the 25 largest regions. Metro areas are shaped by regional markets for investment, jobs, and housing. They drive the economic performance of the nation as a whole. Despite these communities' high populations, there are minimal resources and opportunities available to them, especially when compared with those afforded to suburban communities. We are going to examine the current state of housing, transportation, and jobs, as well as historical factors that brought us to this point. These institutions collectively impact and perpetuate educational inequality. We will also shed light on Anyon's solutions for educational and societal reform.
The location of businesses and public transit routes determines where poverty is concentrated in the region. For the most part, entry-level and minimum wage jobs exist primarily in suburban areas, including about 2/3 of newly created jobs. However, most of these workers live in urban areas. As such, housing and transportation is expensive for workers who must commute daily to these low-paying jobs. According to Anyon, basic costs for working families with an income between $20,000 and $50,000 amount to almost 58% of their income. Even in metro areas with great public transportation, less than half the jobs are accessible by public transit, and 94% of very low-income families do not own cars. This inevitably leads to further joblessness and poverty.
According to Anyon, housing segregation directly impacts school segregation. There is a major shortage of affordable housing in metro areas and central cities. There are more than 500,000 families on public housing waiting lists. In many cities, the wait is 2 to 5 years and often longer. She also says that after years of neglect, the remaining public housing projects now need $20 to $30 billion of critical repairs. Government housing was originally intended for low-income citizens of all races, but it has now become a means of racial segregation. Anyon says that confining low-income people of color to housing in poor urban neighborhoods also creates segregated low-income schools.
According to Anyon, the characteristics of low-income schools in segregated neighborhoods are extremely well documented. Insufficient school funding, few advanced courses, too few qualified teachers, undemanding pedagogy, buildings in disrepair, and large classes. All of this contributes to fewer opportunities to learn, lower graduation rates, ultimately very low college graduation rates, and fewer labor market possibilities.
Long-standing economic policies led to enormous losses of money, homes, jobs, and retirement income during the Great Recession. During the last quarter of 2008, over 1.5 million jobs were lost. Extreme financialization, which is a shift in production in goods and services to profiteering through speculation on debt, contributed greatly. Meanwhile, individual taxes and wages absorbed much of the financial impact of the Great Recession. In 2012, the federal minimum wage was $7.25, which is below the poverty line for a family of 3. In 1967, when accounting for inflation, the minimum wage was $8.25. Taxes on corporations have been sharply reduced, declining from 40% in the 1940s to 9.2% in 2001. However, taxes for middle-class families increased steadily.
Although the Great Recession is the latest economic hardship to hit the U.S., Anyon explains that intermittent periods of financialization, cycles of expansion, crisis, and recession are recurring economic phenomena. However, there have been marked periods of economic growth. For example, the nation's economy grew between 1945 and 1973, stimulated by regulated federal policies. As a result, both wages and family income rose from the late 40s to the late 70s. However, this came to a standstill in the mid-1970s as stagflation brought slow economic growth, high unemployment, and globalization of industries. The 1980s were historically regarded as a free market and marked by shrinking government spending.
To improve the current housing situation, Anyon suggests that we go against the tides of gentrification so people of all socioeconomic backgrounds can live in neighborhoods and increase mainstreaming of poor African Americans and Latinos into higher income neighborhoods, which has been attributable to lowering the white poverty rate. One particular way to do this is through mobility programs, which, as Anyon explains, relocates urban families who want to move to less segregated areas in the region. In most urban regions, where a child is housed largely determines the quality of his or her school experience.
One of the most effective education reforms for improving poor children's school performance would be housing policies that integrate poor families into middle-class neighborhoods and schools in an affordable manner. Anyon says class-based exclusionary zoning is clearly in an area that needs policy and behavioral change. Only a few states have managed to provide places for low-income families to live outside the central city, called fair share housing laws, which mandate that all municipalities in a region build their fair share of housing of low-income and moderate-income housing. Overall, creating and maintaining affordable housing for low-income families directly impacts students' academic success. One essential way to improve the lives of urban citizens is to create public transit routes from cities to suburbs, connecting these individuals with entry-level jobs they are seeking. Anyon provides further suggestions to connect urban job seekers with employment in regional economies. These policies include training programs that make explicit connections between workers in urban centers and suburban employers, and as stated earlier, affordable housing in more affluent areas, which would allow entry-level employers to live closer to job centers.
Jobs are a key piece of educational reform. In an effort to connect those in urban areas with jobs, Anyon recommends reconnecting neighborhood economies to regional markets and firms by locating businesses that are successful in the larger regional economies in inner-city neighborhoods. This would place jobs back in the urban area and take the burden off people to commute to the suburbs for employment.
Other recommendations that Anyon proposes are to offer job training programs at no cost to prospective employers and to provide local entrepreneurs the same tax write-offs as those of corporate chains. All of these can further allow people greater access to jobs, improving the greater community at large.
Anyon says, the reasons to organize in the economic arena have become more urgent as the Great Recession lingers, and reasons to organize education have multiplied as private decision-making and profit-taking drives the enterprise. She states that recent school reforms are generally corporate-driven policy reforms, which can be altered with enough public pressure. She sees the fight for educational equality as a continuation in the tradition of the civil rights struggle, and that the willingness of parents to fight for the rights of their children as an important component for mobilizing action.
Anyon views educators as a critical building block for building a constituency for economic and educational change, as teachers and principals have continual access to parents and youth. She believes reform success will most likely occur when politicians and education reform groups work alongside community members to discuss what changes are really needed. Overall, Anyon believes that the most effective route to positive education reform is through localized, grassroots organization of school officials and families. She cites multiple successful organizations across the nation which she believes have made positive progress in these fields.